Welcome, everybody. Fantastic to have you here. Welcome to another episode of Whip Around's In You Know series. Today, focusing on the safety management cycle. Some of you have probably been through a couple of these webinars recently. We've looked at DOT audits. We've looked at a who's who in the FMCSA compliance. So hopefully this continues to build your knowledge and sort of compile some digestible insights into the world of compliance. Fantastic to have you back with us, Sean. Sean Garney, Vice President, Scopolitas Transport Consulting, a great ally of ours at Whip Around and always a domain expert that we bring into these sort of things. Welcome, Sean. Thanks for being here. And for perhaps those that haven't been on one of our previous webinars before, do you want to give a little intro as to your history and what Scopolitas do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here. Great to be back. In this awesome series. I'm Sean Garney. I'm Vice President of Scopolitas Transportation Consulting. I've been in the industry 20 years, sort of started, in the rank and file as a driver and a loader and a load planner, moved to logistics and did some brokerage, spent 10 years with the American Trucking Associations, a little time with the federal government, and now I'm here in our consulting firm. And, it's really me and Dave Oshecki and a few others, and we provide compliance and training services to motor carriers and partners like you, and conduct mock audits and just really help carriers understand what is compliance, what is safety, and sort of how those two things interact with one another. So I think this is a great topic to sort of explore that a little bit.
Fantastic, thanks. And we'll get some details of how people can reach out to you directly later in the webinar. I'm Tim Boyle. I'm the co-founder of Whip Around. We are a fleet inspection maintenance platform that's been really designed around compliance, and that's what makes us stand out in the marketplace. Is we have really built our product over the years with the FMCSA rules and regulations in mind, and a lot of our customers rely on us and the workflows and processes that our platform delivers to help them achieve higher SMS scores and better safety measures. Sean, I might kick over to you and let you sort of take the lead on what is a topic that comes up a lot in our space, and I think a very, very useful methodology and understanding of how people can establish a really improved safety culture within their transport operation.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I really appreciate it. The safety management cycle it's an interesting topic and a great way to sort of analyze your fleet and how you're doing. I think I'll sort of just introduce the flow of this particular webinar so that everybody is sort of prepared to interact. We're hoping for a really interactive experience here. I'll talk about some basic concepts, talk through a slide or two, and then we can open it up for questions. And if anybody's got any questions, I'm sure there's a box around here somewhere. They can click on the box, and hopefully, Tim, you can sort of collect those and throw them at me. But I'll just be prepared. We're going to have a number of pauses here to have a bit more of a sort of a conversational flow. So with that, I'll dive right into, what is the safety management cycle? And it's really a process that's designed to help diagnose breakdowns in your safety management processes, right? And it starts actually at the end. It starts by identifying poor outputs like violations and crashes, and sort of works backwards to understand why it's happening. We're going from the what back to the why, and often it's more than one why, but it's a way to sort of improve your compliance and thereby sort of improve your safety by understanding what the root causes of these various sort of problems are, right? It's a bit of like a self-guided discovery, to use sort of a self-help type phrase. It's sort of a guided brainstorming exercise where you can, methodically go through your processes to understand where are some of the deficiencies, right? Are they communication based? Are they training based? Are they qualifications based? And we're going to get all into this, but let's take a quick look at what exactly this looks like, right? It's a safety management cycle. The first thing I'll point out is it's a circle. I've seen a lot of different representations of this cycle. it's always a circle. And that's because this process is iterative, right? It should be ongoing. It shouldn't have a beginning and an end. It should feed on itself, right? And so we have our 6 roles or our six sort of stops on this circle, and we'll go into them certainly more in detail here in a little bit. But it starts with your policies and procedures. What are your policies? Do you have them in place to avoid your challenges? What are the roles and responsibilities? Who's accountable in your organization, right? And do they know they're accountable, and to what? Qualification and hiring actually means a lot more than, am I hiring safe drivers, or am I hiring great technicians, right? There's communication. How does your communication flow through your organization? Are your drivers being trained? Is there sort of cross-training happening between different audiences? And then monitoring and tracking. This is the bread and butter. This is where you find out whether or not your programs are working. And then finally, meaningful action. And that can take a couple different sort of a positive or a negative tone depending. But the idea is, I've identified a problem. Now it's time to take action and correct that in whatever way is necessary. So, that's really like a really broad overview of the safety management cycle. I don't know if there's any questions, or you want to have a little back and forth here, Tim.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a question that I've got, I guess, is, as a carrier, when you're looking at this cycle, and you mentioned that it is always a circle, it's a iterative process that keeps on evolving. How frequently should carriers be referring back to this and running the ruler over their processes and procedures?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. I think we at Scopolitas, when thinking about the top level processes, what are my policies and procedures? We like to look at those annually, right? Because your fleet is changing and adapting, and you need to make sure that those sort of policies reflect what you're doing today, right? And reminding everybody what their roles and responsibilities are. Now, certainly some of the training and communication, that's going to happen much more frequently based on, regular audits that hopefully you're conducting within your carrier. So I think it depends, but I'd say at least once a year, and, for that high level audit that we talked about, when you initiate this safety management cycle, I think it is a cycle and it is iterative, but I do think it's important to start with policies and procedures always. And we'll talk about why that's important. But, as you're finding challenges in your fleet, you need to start from the very beginning. Do people understand what the policies of my organization are? Do I have a policy for that problem? Can it be addressed in that way? And sort of should flow down from there. So as often as necessary, at least once a year, and start from the beginning.
And do you think in most cases people have all of these policies in one place? Is that something that when potentially a enforcement officer or investigator comes in to discuss and reflect on the components of the safety management cycle, are they looking for all of these to be consolidated from all the areas of the business into one place for quick reference, or are they usually sort of dispersed just depending on business size and resource available?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say a couple things to that. Most often, if I audit a carrier, I'm going to look at their policies and procedures, and most of those are in a singular manual, right? Which I think is helpful in that way. But it really, too, depends on the size of your organization, right? If I'm a really small organization, I might not have as many written policies because I can communicate them, more directly. I'm 2 drivers, me and another driver. Well, we could just communicate our policies. I'd always recommend they be written down so that you can hold people accountable. But yeah, I think consolidation is usually your best bet. Now, a full fleet safety manual is going to have different portions. And some folks are going to separate that out and say, here, maintenance folks, here's your portion. But it's important for everybody to know that there's a singular manual that delineates all the processes and responsibilities of everybody, so that there's this sort of cross-organizational pollination that happens.
Makes sense. Absolutely. And I'll just, as we round up maybe this little question slot here, there are some more areas in the webinar that we're going to again invite questions, but at any time use the question channel on the side of the webinar screen here. Fire any questions through that you think are going to be relevant. We'll talk a bit at the end about an upcoming question and answer session we're actually going to have with Sean that is a bit more far-reaching, but please, anything you've got, fire through, and we'll try and get through as many questions as we can, either through the webinar or at the end.
Great. All right, well, so I guess that's a good segue for me to sort of dive a little deeper into the various, the various components of this. Like I mentioned before, there we go. Okay, so let's talk about those 6 elements that we talked about. We'll just sort of broadly define them. And then later in the webinar, what we'll do is we'll dive a little deeper into each one with sort of a vehicle maintenance focus, right? So let's pick one area of compliance and safety, and let's try to talk about how this cycle might appropriately apply to that, right? So the first thing is policies and procedures. And here we're talking about rules and guidelines for behavior. That's what your policies are. Your procedures are the ways in which you've decided to enforce your policies. I have one particular policy, and through my procedures, I'm going to accomplish my policy goal. Those are very high level. They're usually written sort of by top management and flow down. Next is our roles and responsibilities. And here we're talking about what each employee will do specifically to accomplish those policies and procedures, right? Who needs to be involved in each particular part of the process, and how am I going to hold them accountable, right? And here it's super important to consider all levels of your organization, right? So it's your driver's responsibility to complete the DVIR. But if I'm the driver manager and I know my drivers aren't properly doing that at the frequency required, well, then I need to be held accountable too, right? So we really need to look at our organization and say, all right, where is that buck going to stop ultimately? Do I knowingly have a challenge in my organization? Next is qualifications and hiring. And here we're just thinking about, hey, have I matched the right skills with the right people with the right skills to accomplish the goals I need, right? And it's pretty obvious. We all have hiring standards that we use for drivers and mechanics. Do you meet those qualifications? But I think it's important to note that this can be applied internally as well as externally, right? If you don't have a good fit for somebody who's required to manage drivers, let's say, but doesn't have the bedside manner, maybe there's a better fit for that person in the organization. And you should really strive to find spots in an organization that fit. So are they qualified today in your organization? Are they going to continue to be qualified moving down the line? And of course, finding great candidates. And we have some tips on that a little bit later as well. Training and communication. Really, we've identified the roles and responsibilities. We've found the proper candidate. Now we need to make sure that they have the skills and resources at hand to perform the tasks that they've been asked to perform, right? You're going to ensure you've identified employees that are trained on all of these previous elements, right? And you're going to give them ongoing training. And we're going to talk a lot later about communicating inside of your organization to make sure that we all know what our roles and responsibilities are, and trying to identify where those might break down. We talked about monitoring and tracking. Are your employees living up to their roles and responsibilities? Do you have good record keeping? What are your SMS scores? And what do they tell me about where my organization is and whether or not I'm being successful? Helping the carrier really be aware of what's happening in the organization on a micro and a macro level. And then finally, meaningful action. Positive, meaningful action. We're talking about incentives and bonuses to motivate people. And then, of course, corrective action. I think the most commonly used sort of corrective action is like a progressive disciplinary policy, where we might have a verbal warning, then a written warning, then a sort of corrective action, and possibly termination, and just making sure that the roles and responsibilities have been properly executed and providing corrective, meaningful action if they haven't. So that's just a real high-level overview of what we're looking at, and like I said, we'll dive a little deeper. But maybe I'll pause for a minute. I see we just added another participant and see if there's any questions.
Nothing coming through yet, Sean. I think you're obviously doing such a great job explaining everything so clearly that you've left no stone unturned as yet.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, let's keep up the pace then. Let's talk a little bit more about sort of your specific policies and procedures as they relate to your vehicle maintenance program, right? And I really think of vehicle maintenance in 3 categories: preventative maintenance, demand maintenance, and crisis maintenance. And you want to make sure that you have policies and procedures for all 3, right? Preventative maintenance, that's my periodic inspections. Am I doing those annually, or if I live in California, quarterly, or more frequently? Am I following the manufacturer's specifications for replacing parts? And hopefully I'm exceeding those, right? Do I have my own internal schedule to follow those maintenances to create a solid preventative maintenance program? And do I have the record keeping in place to make sure it happens, right? So have I identified all of the things that need to be done, place them in policy? It's our policy to inspect our trucks every 8 months. Let's say you're being a little bit more aggressive. Okay. And who's going to do that? Your driver, your head mechanic is going to do that. What are your processes for repairing vehicle defects, right? And do you have a policy to prioritize those defects based on sort of their safety impact or their out of service nexus, right? And it's just as important in this case to have a policy and a procedure, not just to repair the defects, but to note those defects, to certify that they've been repaired, and to be able to prove that that's happened, right? And so tracking and repairing are both important. It's not enough to just make sure that you're fixing your truck and inspecting your truck frequently enough. It needs to be well documented so that you can identify any challenges that might happen, right? You need policies and procedures around your DVIR process and your inspection report process. How detailed is your DVIR process? Are you making sure that they're signed off on as repaired, that the next driver getting into the truck is able to identify whether or not there was a defect that should have been repaired? And your inspection report process. I'm popped on roadside. Do I have a good policy to make sure that roadside inspection report is streamed through my maintenance department and then back out to the state enforcement agency as required? What are my out of service procedures? Okay, so, and this is more than just, certainly you need to make sure you have policies and procedures and the drivers are aware, like, hey, I'm put out of service on roadside. Here's who I'm going to call, and here's my next steps. Oh, and don't move the truck until you fix that thing, right? But also, if you identify a defect through the DVIR process, who all is involved in that? You have policies and procedures to make sure that equipment doesn't get dispatched again, that it gets to the repair facility on time, that you have sufficient flow of vehicles to handle that vehicle being out of service for however long. And then, of course, there's the discipline policy that comes along with that to make sure that those that don't live up to those policies and procedures are held accountable. That's, of course, where your roles and responsibilities come in. And here you're going to look across your entire organization, and you're going to try to include everybody in any role or responsibility they might have, right? Managers and supervisors, drivers, dispatchers, mechanics and technicians. All of these people need to be included as you develop your policies and procedures. And even if you have somebody else, say, that's doing the purchasing of equipment, well, maybe they should be included as well, right? So that they have clear roles and responsibilities to make sure that their equipment matches the load and the freight and all of that, right? You need to have a good, solid way to differentiate between safety-related defects and others. And I talked briefly about this before, but who's in charge of looking at all of the defects and the violations that you might find and determining which ones are going to gain priority in your effort to fix them all, right? They all need to be fixed at some point, but some are going to be more pressing than others. So do you have somebody in your organization whose job it is to look at that, right? And to make sure that the most pressing problems are the ones that are addressed first. Of course, you need to empower all the persons to perform their jobs and complete their own missions. And a part of this is also empowering them to hold others accountable, right? Empowering the driver to say, hey, dispatcher, this defect wasn't fixed, and it's an important safety defect. I'm not taking this. That's their responsibility. It's the responsibility of the dispatcher to make sure that they don't dispatch on that truck. But if they did, then somebody else needs to be sort of empowered to make sure that that happens, right? Or another example might be if I have a mechanic and he needs to schedule his maintenance. Well, is he empowered to order the parts necessary to repair? And if he's not, does he communicate well enough with the person who is to make sure that parts are available when they need to be available? Of course, you need to define the roles in all of your necessary daily checks, inspections, certifications. Make sure that everything's getting signed off on, that you know who's responsible for each piece, and that if they fail on that for whatever reason, you can go back and sort of point at them and say, we need to get better at this, right? And then finally, this is such an important role and an oft overlooked role, but what's the role of your dispatcher in a good maintenance program, right? And how do they interact? And I know there's a lot of great systems out there that feed DVIR information to dispatchers and so on and so forth. If you don't have an electronic system, well, then how's word getting back to your dispatcher, right? How do they know not to send a truck out? So just a sampling of what some of those roles and responsibilities might be. And then we have qualification and hiring. And here, obviously, we need to make sure that all of our external candidates meet minimum certification requirements, right? I mean, the government has requirements on training for your mechanic if they're conducting periodic inspections, or if they're conducting brake inspections, or inspecting tank trucks, that sort of thing. But also, are they meeting your internal hiring standards, right? So the government says, I need drivers who have a CDL and have a medical certification. But I say that they need 3 years of driving experience and they can't have had a preventable accident. Well, am I holding those folks accountable to that standard? You need to make sure that you're conducting these thorough previous checks. And I know sometimes it's hard to get in touch with previous employers, but there are other ways too that you can understand the type of operation that somebody you're considering hiring worked for, right? I mean, there's public data out there about the size of the operation, where they operate, their out of service rates, and that can give you a lot of information about the quality of the candidate that you're considering, and will really help you ask these prospective employees some follow-up questions based on this data. Hey, I see that you had, you were with this previous fleet and they were really struggling on their out of service rate. What do you think that's attributable to? And it's also too important to sort of quiz them on some basic knowledge questions about, what do you think the best process, to complete an inspection report is? And, if the answer is the best process is to, correct the vehicle and throw the report in the trash, that there's some deficit in knowledge that will at least have to be addressed post-hire. Posing what-if scenarios is sort of a great way to evaluate somebody's internal priorities and how they would sort of handle crisis scenarios. Load's got to go, customers angry, vehicles out of service. What am I going to do? How am I going to correct this? So certainly I think you can get a lot out of your qualification and hiring with these sort of enhanced background screening processes. And then qualification and hiring, trying to enhance your recruitment process as much as possible by getting the best talent. Absolutely important. So with that, we have just another pause, and I don't know if there's any interesting comments or concerns in there yet.
There is. We've had a question come through, and I think it raises a really good point to discuss around where the responsibility around some of these roles lie. The question is, for the initial 4 to 5 years that the trucks are under warranty, the service and maintenance has to be done by the OEM. Basically, all the service is done in-house is related to older models. So how does that sort of work around warranties and obligations by OEMs versus your internal shop and what you're doing potentially with older vehicles?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's certainly a lot of there's a lot of motor carriers out there who use service centers or OEMs to repair their equipment. I just audited one not too long ago that was sort of bifurcated. They had 1 or 2 shops around the country, but had terminals everywhere. And, from a compliance perspective, you're responsible to maintaining all of those files, regardless of where it's being repaired, right? So if you were inspected if you were investigated by a safety investigator, they would ask you to produce your schedule for repair. They would ask you to produce that cover page identifying the vehicle. They're going to ask you for your preventative maintenance schedule and all of that. And so I can consider them one and the same process. You still need policies and procedures in place to trade that information, to make sure that that communication is happening so that you can get that equipment to the shop, right? So the responsibility for the repair doesn't live on those trucks with your shop, but somebody owns the responsibility to communicate with that OEM to make sure vehicles are available or that, we're replacing parts ahead of schedule and that sort of thing. So it creates an additional challenge, but ultimately the burden is still on the carrier to make sure that all of that's done. And, if your periodic inspection gets done, 3 months late because the OEM didn't have time to take you, an inspector's not going to go to the OEM and say, tisk, tisk, you got to work faster. They're going to stick with the carrier and say, hey, you got to put that truck out until.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. It really overlays everything back on the carrier, doesn't it? No matter who's affecting the repairs or maintenance.
Yeah, go ahead.
From a bottom-up approach, I guess there's a lot within the safety management cycle that could seem to be daunting if you were to sit down and start reviewing all of your approaches and procedures. Is there a way to sort of start from a bottom-up approach potentially that gives you some focus to start evaluating? And where would you usually start that approach from?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the genesis of the safety management cycle, like why it was created, was actually to facilitate conversations between safety investigators from FMCSA and the motor carriers, right? So that they didn't just say, hey, y'all failed, have a good day. They want to engage in a conversation with the carrier about why they had this problem and where that problem might be and how to fix it. And so to answer your question, I think you really start with particular problems that you're noticing in the data, right? So I'm noticing that, I'm having lots of lighting violations. Okay, well, let's take a look at all of the people responsible for a lighting problem. I probably have a procedure, a policy that says pre-trip inspections must happen. Okay, who's responsible in that process? And sort of step through from there. So I think you start at your discovered violation or your perceived problem, and then you take that piece up to the top and start working down through the process. until you find the problem.
Makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. No more questions coming through in the live stream there. No doubt a few more may pop up, but
Okay.
doing a great job. Thanks, Sean. It's insightful stuff, and it's becoming very obvious how important this is as such an overarching piece of compliance.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so next we'll talk about training and communication. And, I talk about training with carriers a lot, and we have some clients that do training, and we know that our drivers are trained to death. And that's really a good thing. So we're not going to talk about all of the ways or the various things that you should train your employees on. I think what we're going to talk about is sort of more broadly, how are we communicating things amongst our fleet? And are we conveying expectations to all applicable staff, right? Do people know, are you communicating with people their responsibilities, what they should be doing? And, I've had a number of interactions where drivers aren't necessarily, maybe that information is not getting to the driver. Like your driver, your responsibility is to conduct a complete and thorough DVRR at the end of the day, full stop. But the driver just thinks he's trying to finish his day. So he's going to click through this thing and he's going to be done. And it's going to look like he did it, but he's not doing it. So are you communicating how important that is, right? And, those types of things are pretty easy to discover. And what are your channels for communication, right? Are you having your regular safety meetings or your newsletters? I know quarterly safety meetings, monthly safety meetings, a lot of people still use them, and they were in vogue for a long time. But it's getting harder and harder to get drivers all in one place, especially under COVID. A lot of carriers I've talked to have been unable to conduct an in-person safety meeting all year. So do you have new channels? Do you have new ways that you're able to reach out through various devices or anything else to try to meet these drivers and mechanics where they are, right? And then, focusing between the conflict between availability and repair requirements, right? So dispatchers always have, and salesmen and those folks always have a lot of pressure to move freight. That's what they got to do, right? So they need that equipment available. So how do you communicate? How do you open those lines of communication between those two conflicting factors, right? How do I make sure that drivers can appropriately or mechanics can appropriately communicate with dispatchers and salespeople that, like, hey, our capacity is constrained and we're going to need new capacity in order to achieve your goals, and we're all on the same team here, right? As you communicate these roles and responsibilities too, we need to ensure that employees understand and fully accept those responsibilities and communicate them to all of the other people that they interact with. To use that DVR example again, it's so important that the next driver knows that he's got to look for that DVIR before he gets in that truck. And if a defect wasn't fixed, he needs to know that he can't take that truck. And you know what? The dispatcher needs to know that too. So do they understand that, and can they take that as their personal responsibility? Another great way that you can sort of communicate the value of your programs is to simply publish your basic scores, or the data around them. And that helps you either celebrate as a team, great job, we did it, or to sort of encourage people to, like, hey, it's time to get going, right? You just had that question earlier about the communication channels between the vehicle manufacturers and the relevant staff, making sure those are available. This is one that I just ran into recently. A company was transitioning to a new sort of vehicle maintenance software, right? Something to track how they conduct their vehicle maintenance policies. But only one or two people were trained on this particular piece of software. which created huge bottlenecks, right? So creating redundant training opportunities and cross-training your staff and other responsibilities, I think can be really helpful and can help people gain an appreciation for what the challenges of other people are. You know, you don't want somebody saying, hey, what you're doing is stopping me from doing my job. You know, you really want that person to understand why the other person needs to do their job, right? And another great example of cross-training staff is your recruiting staff. Do they know all of the things that your drivers or mechanics are going to need to do? Because if they did, they sure could target their, their recruitment efforts. They sure could better sort of qualify those folks. So, there's lots of ways that you can train folks. There's lots of ways that you can deliver training. And certainly that's a great way to fix defects. But for me, the thrust of this slide is how are we communicating across our organization? What are those channels? And through that communication, you'll find those training opportunities. Tracking and monitoring, we talked about the rubber meeting the road here. Are you conducting regular audits on your compliance documentation? And we've helped carriers set up sort of regular mock audits that they can do on themselves, so that they make sure that they have access to all the documents. One of the most surprising things about conducting audits on carriers is that while carriers often produce all of the documentation necessary to be compliant, they can't always obtain those documents so that they can be reviewed. And if you can't obtain them for an inspector, that means that you're not auditing them yourself, right? That's a breakdown in your safety management process. And so regularly auditing yourself is really going to keep you nimble, right? It's going to make sure that you can get into the system, that you can make sure that you have all of the documentation you need. What do you need in a maintenance program documentation? I mean, you need a lot. You need that cover page. You need your annual inspections. You need your inspection reports. You need work orders and receipts. You need all of those, those DVIRs on defects. There's a bunch of documentation you need. It's actually not super complicated, but are we collecting them in a good space so that I can easily look at them? If you can easily look at them, an inspector will be able to easily look at them, and they won't look quite so hard. I promise you that. If it's hard to look at, I'm going to look at it a lot more hard. Strengthening and tracking your DVIR process, so important for avoiding hours of service or avoiding unnecessary delays. So I think that's pretty easy to process or to track these days. There's a lot of levels of accountability in the DVIR. And so it can be easy to point at either the driver or the mechanic or the carrier official who, confirms the defect was corrected. Of course, monitoring NHTSA and manufacturers for relevant recall information. Do you have somebody that's responsible for that? Because that could be important. Are your lines of communication with the manufacturer open? Implementing methods to track processes. And, I think, and this isn't on this slide, but because perhaps I think it's so obvious, and I'm sure the folks on the call think it's obvious as well, but are you monitoring your SMS score regularly? Are you looking at it to identify the trends? And do I have particular drivers that have troubles on roadsides? Do I have particular vehicles that have troubles on the roadside? Am I getting consistent types of violations? All of that information just lives already in your data. It could live in your DVIR data if you're using sort of an electronic DVIR. So what are your data sources? How can you collect them? And to whom can you attribute them? And then finally, using all this information to really try to plug it into your safety management cycle and trying to understand if you have a systemic breakdown. I don't have a policy. I don't have a person in charge of this. I have too many people in charge of this. Or if I have an individual issue, I have a rogue driver and they're not being held accountable, or I have a mechanic that's signing off on things because they don't want to do the work or whatever it is, right? So using that tracking and monitoring to understand, is this a systemic issue? or is it really just an individual issue, right? And then finally, I can't remember, but I think this is the last slide here. What is meaningful action? And this is, I've discovered my problem through my monitoring, hopefully not because, an inspector knocked on your door. Now, how am I going to fix that? And I always like to start with the positive with incentive programs. And there's certainly a big debate about what's more effective, incentive or discipline. But one of the most common incentive programs that I see out there in the industry, I'm sure a lot of people on the call are aware of, and I find very effective, is, are you rewarding people for clean level 1 inspections? Right? And who are you rewarding? Should be more than the driver, right? Because there's a lot of people involved in the maintenance of a vehicle. And every time they go through, a level 1 inspection is not an insignificant look at your vehicle. And if you're able to get all the way through that clean, shoot, that's pretty good. I've definitely talked to law enforcement personnel who say, hey, look, if I really want to find a violation, I'm going to find one. So getting through a process with a clean one, that's a big deal, man. How are we incentivizing people to do that? Of course, providing immediate feedback and requiring corrective action right away needs to be an important part of your meaningful action, right? So, hey, I noticed that yesterday you failed to do this thing. That's not acceptable. You need to correct it right away. How do you plan on correcting that, right? Always remedial training. I find I communicate all the time with carriers who have parts of their organization that just don't understand the rules, or don't understand the processes that their companies have put in place. And so having that remedial training when you find those problems can be really effective. You want to implement a disciplinary program that corresponds with the risk and the consequences. Now, this is a tricky one, and I'm not a lawyer, thank God. So there are considerations that we might think of there, but it makes sense to that operating a vehicle that should be out of service is a much more serious offense than failing to deliver your inspection report to your carrier, in the next day. So does it make sense to try to balance that and create different disciplinary structures for different things? Now, that's a tangled web that we can weave and can make that can really challenge you. But I do think it's important to demonstrate to those in our organization what are critical problems and what aren't. And I know FMCSA and inspectors from there, they absolutely are looking for acute violations. Those are violations that today are a safety problem, and critical violations, which indicate safety management control problems. So, elevating those, or at least providing a little bit more weight on those, sometimes makes sense. Now, don't forget about your management personnel when thinking about disciplinary programs. It sure is easy to say, my driver is not, this isn't vehicle maintenance, but my driver is not abiding by hours of service rules, or my driver is not conducting proper DVIRs, and I've asked him to, but he won't, or whatever. Well, you're the manager. You're responsible for this person, so you need to find a way to do that or elevate it, right? And so I get to hold you accountable too for that problem. And then finally, if the problem is systemic, you need to make adjustments to one or more of these categories. You need to create a new policy. You need to adjust your roles and responsibilities and flow down from there. So that's I think what I got for meaningful action. And unless there's questions or however you want to handle this, Tim, I'll kick it back to you.
There is a bit of a follow-on question here, and I think I know what it's asking. It's in some cases the same trucks are driven by different drivers. Which driver to take the decision, or if a timely check is not requested, who is accountable? I'm interpreting that to be less about a periodic inspection, more about your DVIR process when you've got drivers driving different trucks. I think you've sort of covered a lot of that in terms of processes and accountability and knowing which drivers are in which vehicles every day and monitoring whether those inspections have happened. But anything else you want to add to that you think might be relevant to carriers who are, having drivers on shift work that are coming in and out of different vehicles at different times?
Yeah, that I think it's a great question. And, I was recently communicating with a carrier who does slip seating, which it sounds like that's what we're talking about, from remote locations. And they feel strongly that their vehicles are well maintained, and they are, and one of the reasons they are is because those two drivers are communicating. The interaction between them is so close. One driver gets out of the truck and the other one's waiting there to get in the truck, right? And so they can communicate about how the truck is driving and whether there was any problems. And that's important, but you haven't documented that now, right? That first driver still needs to produce that DVIR. And if he doesn't, that driver needs to be held accountable. And that second driver needs to sign off that he's pleased that it's been corrected. So there are cases where it's less practical and that it seems to make sense that the two drivers are communicating because they're slip seat. But if you're the manager trying to understand where a breakdown in your process came from, if you don't have that documentation, it's going to be really hard to know, right? So great question. And the slip seating is definitely a thing. And that's one of those things where you wonder how much of the regulations are sort of a paper chase and how much is really meaningful. And in this particular paper chase, it can provide important data to you in the back office,
Absolutely. And it was sort of an unintentional segue, I guess, into what this next sort of couple of minutes is about. Whip around, as I've touched on, we've got a lot of our customers on the webinar today. And again, thank you for your support and your constant feedback to help make our product constantly evolve and be better. For those of you here purely for Sean's great wisdom on the safety management cycle, we'd love to show you about how Whip Around can help you achieve some of these goals. What we were just talking about there, carriers that either are slip seating or particularly the ones that aren't, our platform is designed to really help you affect the safety management cycle. We have two main components to the Whip Around platform. We have Whip Around Inspect, and this was our original core product, which focuses on DVIR, being a digital DVIR solution tailored to specifically match the FMCSA requirements, which a lot of other sort of bolt-on inspection solutions don't actually adhere to. There's the age-old 3-signature rule being one thing that many of these eDVIR products actually miss. How this relates to the safety management cycle, I guess, is not only do we enable a customized process builder in our back-end dashboard that gives you the ability to control the inspection process for your drivers or your operators, for your vehicles or equipment, machinery, whatever it may be. You also get to drill in backwards when you are looking at auditing your procedures and processes and having a look at where you are getting repeated violations, whether it's lights that we talked on before. Having all of this in one centralized digital platform gives you the ability to be able to go and search where all of those inspection items are coming from. Are they coming from a particular vehicle or driver in your world before they become violations? You're able to then track that through to who is responsible for repairing those, the time that may be between the item being flagged as defective and then going to the shop, any comments and communication around that to give you some insight as to where in your internal processes that breakdown may be occurring. All of this can be done without hunting high and low for pieces of paper or relying on the word of mouth or hearsay from drivers or some of your staff or employees in the field. This really brings it all together, and particularly if you are in the position of having an investigation come out and ask you these questions about your processes, this is where you will be able to sit down and say, this is the current workflow. This is where we think we may be going wrong, and this is how we're going to be able to track the improvement process to get us into a better place. The second component, which very much plays into this as well, a few years ago, we evolved the DVIR product into what we call Whip Around Maintain. This enables you to really advance the sort of preventative maintenance aspect of what you're doing in your safety management processes. You can set and forget service schedules and preventative maintenance tasks. You can then combine your reactive maintenance defects from DVIR, whether it's your lights or tire damage, with some of those preventative events such as oil changes, tire rotations, whatever it might be. Combine them into work orders, get them to your internal or external shop, and again, track that process, track the communication, monitor digital accountability around when these things were repaired, who was in charge of repairing them, so that when it does come time to, whether it's annually or whether you've got some issues with violations or your SMS score, you can really work that bottom-up approach from a driver level, a vehicle level, or actually a defect level, and start seeing where some of those issues are coming from, or perhaps where you've got great examples of how these safety management processes are working really well in your business that you can then go and replicate or learn from to roll out to a wider audience. So Whip Around is built for compliance. We've got a lot of great customers providing feedback. We're always evolving our product. And if you haven't had a look at it and you're interested in how we can help you improve your safety and compliance performance as a business, obviously keep your fleet moving by keeping unpredicted maintenance and issues and things to a minimum, then we'd absolutely love to talk to you. Visit us at whiparound.com. Visit our YouTube channel. We're starting to build a library of this In the Know series. We want to keep bringing these compliance topics to you, and we'd love to hear what other topics you would like to hear about. We're happy to go and bring the expertise, people like Sean and Dave from Scopelitis in. We'd love to know what is important to you or what we can do a little bit of digging for. So come and visit us at the website. Let us know. Leave a comment here after the webinar. Leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos, and we'd be happy to oblige. This webinar will be sent out, the recording, to all attendees, all registrants after this, so you'll get the chance to review it. If you have any other questions for Sean, feel free to send them through to us. Or Sean, how can anyone find you? If they want a more one-to-one engagement with Scopelitis, maybe some of the mock audit reviews and other advice you provide, what's the easiest way to find you?
Yeah, we have a contact us link on our webpage. It's scopelitistransportation.com. So they can check it out there, or, happy to run through you sort of thing. Next time maybe we'll put a little something on the slide there. But I think if they contact you, you can put them right through to me. And we're always happy to help, do a lot of work with carriers trying to sort of get their compliance shop in order. So happy to help.
Fantastic. And leading into that, we actually, Sean has kindly agreed to doing a more open forum question and answer session, which we're hosting on the 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll get some communication out through our usual channels. We'll email everyone that registered for this event. And that's an opportunity to really ask open-ended questions about issues or questions or the unknown that you might have around your compliance. So it would be great for anyone here we've got some questions today, but anything that springs to mind in the next week or so that you think you want to get answered, we're happy to, to bear the cost of getting this real expertise to anyone that needs it without you having to build a big project around it at that initial phase. So keep an eye out for that Q&A session on the 25th. Thank you all very much for attending. As always, it's a pleasure. We'll keep bringing these topics to you. And again, Sean, we really appreciate it. Having someone with your expertise and history in the sector, I think adds so much value. So we're extremely grateful for having you come and join us.
Yeah, appreciate you, Tim. Appreciate being a partner.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Great to have you. Have a great day.